So let's talk about borrowed powers. What are borrowed powers? Borrowed powers are expansion-specific powers, items, tools for your characters to use that will eventually be taken away at the start of a new expansion. They are temporary, and your specialization and class will lose all of those powers once a new expansion comes in. Sometimes even once a new tier comes in. Take Bentic, for example. This is something that has been increasing over time since we started this entire deal in Legion. Legion is when you started getting lots of things on your characters, but not really on your talent rows or your passives or your spells. Try to go back to Warlords of Draenor and try to remember, did you have anything that was taken away from you at the end of Warlords of Draenor that wasn't in your abilities and spells and passives? No, not really. You had a legendary ring, right? That's it. So let's take Legion, because that's where it started. Well, let's take our Illidan. Yeah, that's one. Yeah, that's the one. Nice. What did we have in Legion? In Legion, we had Artifact Weapon, which needed to be leveled up and farmed through AP. Then we had the Legendaries with very powerful effects for your class and spec that could even modify the way you played and drastically change some of the power levels of certain specs. You had class souls. I'm not gonna consider class soul a borrowed power in and of itself. The only thing close to a borrowed power that a class soul had was the fact that it had some gating system for you to reach borrowed power pieces. For example, being able to use two legendaries was gated by class souls. I am putting it there simply because of the comparison to be made with covenants, which will be another system introduced in Shadowlands. And then we had relics. Relics are, yes, part of the artifact weapon, but they function very differently. The artifact weapon is there to point out the AP farming, whereas the relics are there to point out the relic farming, which were two completely different tasks you needed to complete for your character. Now, when we look at these powers, when we look at these activities, these systems, we have to look how long did they persist throughout the expansion, right? So we have this line, which signifies the entire expansion, and then we take a look at how long did you actually interact with this, how long were they relevant. So the artifact weapon obviously was relevant for the entire expansion, right? Yes, it went in jumps. You start the artifact weapon and then eventually you will cap it, but then artifact weapon was limited to a single spec. So whenever you respec, you have to start all over. You had a catch-up mechanism, it was easier, but you still had to grind AP. And then Blizzard introduced a new piece of artifact weapon traits that you needed to also level up. And at the end of the tier, at the end of the expansion, you also had an endlessly levelable trait, the Concordance of the Legionfall, to always dump points in. This remained relevant throughout the expansion. Then you had your Legendaries. Legendaries were very tough at the start, required massive amount of grinding if you wanted to min-max their usage, and they remained relevant throughout the expansion. Similar to what we've seen after. Yes, they had the vendor, yes, it would make it easier, there were plenty of problems like Blizzard not telling you that you were capped at 2 legendaries, so even after you got 2, you had tons of people that continued to farm, and Blizzard didn't even say. People had to start coming out with graphs and spreadsheets for weeks until Blizzard had to come out and say, oops, yeah, we fucked up, sorry. But legendaries did remain rather relevant for the entirety of the expansion. And then you have class souls. Class souls were, a story experience that was divided into every single class in the game. And with a tiny little deviation at the start for each different spec. This was particularly good for, alts, rerolling, changing characters. It kept things fresh. And lastly, you have relics. Relics were still considered gear, which means every new tier, the item level goes up, which means you need 3 new relics. And you need 3 new relics for your main spec, and then 3 new relics for all your alt specs. So throughout the expansion, we can say that in Legion, most of the borrowed powers carried from the start to the finish. Now, very important point here, what we are looking is the quality of borrowed power time sink that forces upon you, not the duration. How much grind, how much farming, and essentially how much weight and burden are the borrowed powers going to put on your character. And Legion was pretty heavy of a series of borrowed powers that needed to be maintained over time as a chore, as a repeated chore. You had to burst your ass off just to get the good relics, and then a new tier comes out, new item level scaling, and now you have to get relics all over again. So don't get it the wrong way. This style of borrowed power system in Legion, when it started with this whole borrowed power madness, was actually pretty bad, because these borrowed powers were just too ongoing. They required too high of a maintenance. Then we move over to BFA. Obviously, we lose every single thing we had in Legion. Let's have our Sylvanas here to signify the expansion. No, not this Sylvanas, yeah, this Sylvanas. What did we have in BFA? Well, in BFA we had the necklace, which was in the same vein of the artifact weapon, purely related to AP farming. We had Azerite gear, Azerite traits, Benthic gear, we had corruptions, and we had essences. Now, back with our line of the old expansion, how did it work? Well, necklace, much like the weapon, relevant the entire expansion, you had to constantly farm AP. Azerite, well, Azerite is going to be similar to relics, right? Since Azerite is gear. You're going to cap at the end of the tier with all the Azerite you want, and then the new tier comes out, boom, you need new relics. And in BFA, you need new Azerite. Rinse and repeat for every single tier. Benthic gear, again, relevant the entire tier. Corruption, after the Benthic, and Benthic was dropped, took place of the Benthic as a borrowed power that you needed to farm and grind in complete RNG fashion. And yes, much like in Legion, they ended up getting the vendor out when nobody cared anymore, months and months after release. And lastly, we have essences, which were introduced mid-expansion, essentially, in Eternal Palace. And you got them very quickly, all your essences. Yes, you had multiple ranks, which increased the duration of this acquisition of borrowed power, but once you had them, play around with them, swap them around, you could also play them and use them on your off-specs just fine. Of course, much later they added help for your alts and the acquisition of these essences. Now, what we can see from this is that compared to Legion, the amount of oppressive borrowed powers, grindy borrowed powers, were definitely lowered. I mentioned the necklace is the same as the artifact weapon, but when you think about it, necklace level has not been relevant ever since the necklace level was tied to Azerite armor and the rings of traits needed to be unlocked by the necklace level. Ever since they gave you free max level, always unlocked Azerite pieces, the necklace level became far less relevant, far less oppressive. AP farming had not become, mandatory in months. Azerite is also much easier to obtain than relics. Yes, the start was terrible. You didn't have a vendor, couldn't drop from Mythic Plus, there were few of them from raids, and then it was changed, but much earlier than you would expect compared to relics. Relics were never even changed, there wasn't even a vendor for relics, it was completely still random. So Azerite, yes, was the entire expansion, but was way less oppressive than relics. And then you have Benthic and Corruption, which count as basically one borrowed power, because once Benthic started, Corruption wasn't there, and once Benthic ended, Corruption came in. And then you have Essences, essentially missing for Alpha and expansion. So the amount of oppressiveness here is starting to go down compared to Legion. And then finally, we are in Shadowlands. Let's look at our mascot, our icon of Shadowlands. Of course, here it is. So what do we have in Shadowlands? We can already see that the number of borrowed powers are starting to shrink, since in Shadowlands we're going to have legendaries, we're going to have covenants, and we're going to have soulbinds. So we are already at a lower number. Let's draw our lines, and what do we have here? Legendaries. You would think I would list them the same as I did in Legion. Instead, this is what it looks like. Why? It looks like this because the legendaries in Legion were completely RNG, and you had to constantly try to get them. You didn't know when you were going to get them, you didn't know which you were going to get. Since I'm a very lucky person, I played, farming LFR, normal, heroic, and mythic of previous tiers for months, and I went 6 legendaries in a row without getting my best in slot, or second best in slot, or third best in slot. That's how random it was, which means replayability, grindability of the borrowed power. But Shadowlands, not at all. Shadowlands, there is no RNG involved. Besides getting the actual pattern to learn the legendary effect, which is going to be very quick, similar to getting your essences in BFA. Once you have that, you get to choose which legendaries you craft. And if you want the lower item level legendary, just to get the effect, you don't care much about the item level of the item, it's only going to take you a couple of weeks. Within 2 months, you can have every spec-specific legendary done in 2 months. Done. You don't have to grind, you don't have to farm. You're not forced to spam Mythic Plus because it increased your bad luck protection, or do LFR, or world quests, or the withered scenario just because it gave you chance for legendary. Nothing like that. Just a few weeks and you get your legendaries. To upgrade your legendaries over time, all you have to do is 2 wings of Torghast. Each completed wing up to the level 8 of the wing gives you 100 soul ash. It's gonna take you 200 for the small upgrade over time. And that's it. Let's look at Covenants. That's how it looks like. I mean, literally, you're gonna do a quest with some 1 minute of roleplay and then they give you your abilities. And that's it. Nothing else. Take Covenants and put them in place of the necklace from BFA or artifact weapon from Legion. There is no AP to farm, there's nothing to grind. You're not gonna get one ability from the Covenant at rank 1 and you need to constantly farm world quests and emissaries to get the ability to rank 30. No, it's just there. From day 1, rest of the expansion you're gonna still have that. And then look at the attachment of the Covenants, the Soulbinds. For those of you who don't know, Soulbinds are the passive effects of your Covenants. Soulbinds have conduits. You have a smaller effect and then a major effect that you get to decide which one it is. It is starting at rank 1. Essentially by grinding Covenant reputation called Renown, you can get them up from rank 1 to rank 15. This is the closest thing you get to an artifact power farming. However, it's much more lax, much simpler, and it's not infinitely grindable. It's also time gated, because you can't just farm it endlessly. On top of that, once you reach the max rank, you're over. There is no extra keep farming this forever to get extra stats. So the end of the borrowed power look of Shadowlands is this. Oh, I'm gonna have to play the Blizzard shill here for a second, guys, because to me this looks like a massive improvement. The amount of oppressive chores that you're forced to do coming into Shadowlands seems to be much lower than in BFA, which was already somewhat lower than in Legion. Try to think about all the things you have to do in Legion and all the things you have to do in BFA, and then compare to what I've just told you about Shadowlands and what exactly you will have to do in a month, in 2 months, and then in 6. What do you have to do in 6 months? In BFA you were still swamped in shit Azerites, you had no vendor, you still had to constantly farm your necklace for levels. In Legion you still had 2 legendaries and they were Cephus and Prydas. You had to constantly farm your AP for your weapon, and then you had to reroll or go to a different spec and you had to farm again, and then you had to farm relics for all those weapons. Don't forget that AP farming was tied to Mythic Plus, so you had to spam Mythic Plus. You couldn't even do world quests, or there wasn't even some sort of cap. It was just Mythic Plus all day, Maw of Souls all day. So this to me looks much better in terms of time spent. I said it could be worse, but that's worse only if you like grinding, only if you like the game telling you and giving you a commitment. Logging into the game and having a list of chores prepared for you. Oh, I have to cap islands, I have to do my Mythic Plus, I have to do my emissaries, I have the reputation dailies from Mechagon and Najatar. Only if you like that, then Shadowlands is gonna feel more empty. Because you will enter a new expansion in a situation where you will have way more free time to actually choose what you want to do. And with way less chores thrown at you from all angles, like in the 2 previous expansions. So to me, this is a very positive change. There is way more room to just enjoy yourself and do what you like. And we finally will be able to see if some of these people complaining about these borrowed powers actually enjoy the game and aren't simply addicted and log in the game and do all the chores. But if somebody told them, hey, you can do whatever you want to do, they idle, they AFK in the capital city for 10 minutes and then they log out. Tell me what you prefer, if you prefer the Legion or the BFA style, or if you like the Shadowlands more freestyle version. Personally, I'm in the Shadowlands camp right now, definitely.